Few would have believed, in the early days of the 19th century, that in the years to come, the railway would dominate our lives in the way that it does. That each day, millions of lives would play out within the many station buildings or terminuses, and that those iron horses would transport us with ease to all corners of the land. Though from its earliest days, this triumph of the Industrial Revolution has been shadowed by much tragedy, as does anywhere that becomes inherent and dependable to so many lives, and, with all its trappings, every day and every journey, there remains a fine line between life and death. Among the whirling weeds and decaying tombstones of Liverpool Cathedral stands a lonely mausoleum. Within lies William Huskisson, a statesman and financier, whose life's work was instrumental in expanding the British Empire, but whose untimely death will remain forever etched in the history of the railway. On the 15th of September 1830, during the opening ceremony of the world's first passenger railway between Liverpool and Manchester, Huskisson was struck down and killed by Stephenson's rocket. His became the first in a myriad of fatalities as the railway extended its tentacles across the land, and where there's death, tales of the supernatural were soon to follow. Glimmering lights and unearthly cries, both seen and heard, where the bodies of those victims lay dead and dying after that terrible crash. The signalman, long gone, whose footsteps are heard climbing the stairs to that lonely old box where in life they spent their working days, and whose presence makes manning the graveyard shift impossible. Or the spectral train, with its ghostly passengers, doomed to replay its fateful journey across that turbulent river where the bridge once stood. Whether it be a dream or a fact that the dead still haunt our earthly life, we are all, even the least impressionable, conscious at times of an apprehension that, out of the darkness, powers lurking by our side may suddenly reveal themselves, and we will be left helpless in their hands, exposed to all possibilities of the unseen world. The River Tay, on the east coast of Scotland, divides towns and cities where for over 100 years a single railway bridge has been a vital communication between those on the north shore and those on the south. Though before it there stood another, one which foundered during an almighty storm on the 28th of December 1879. Its foundations still emerge like gravestones from the murky waters of the river. On that night, a train carrying 75 passengers made its way onto the bridge to begin its final leg across the stormy river to the city of Dundee. Halfway across, the storm reached its crescendo. The swollen waters rose against the struts and the bridge began to buckle. Its girders snapped like twigs, and down it came, taking with it the locomotive, its carriages, and all those men, women and children trapped within. 75 people went into the Tay that night. No one came out alive. All perished in the icy waters on the 28th of December, 1879. When the waters swell and the waves crash against the bridge and the wind howls throughout, the eerie whistle of a spectral train has been heard as it passes out across the river where the old bridge once stood. With a final shriek of its whistle, it vanishes into the wind, only to return each time a storm breaks along the Firth of Tay. In the Lincolnshire town of Bourne stands the Red Hall, which for over 400 years has been a home, a school, and even a Victorian railway station. Built for a wealthy London grocer, the Red Hall had various owners before the Digby family came to live. The last member to reside here was Lady Catherine Digby, who transformed the house and its gardens into a proud English estate. Following her death here in 1836, the property was again leased to various tenants before being sold to the Bourne and Essendine Railway Company, where it became Bourne Station. The Red Hall became the booking office and station master's house, during which the gardens vanished and the house fell to disrepair, suffering 100 years of neglect and vibrations from steam locomotives and rolling stock. It was during this time that both station staff and passengers made reports of a woman in white seen flitting through the booking hall and along the platforms on moonlit nights, her cries echoing around the walls of this old, decaying building. Most conclude that the spirit entity was that of Lady Catherine Digby, dismayed at what became of her lifelong work. Since the line's closure in 1959, the Red Hall, under new ownership, has been slowly returned to its former glory. Now, perhaps, Lady Catherine Digby may finally be able to rest in eternal peace. Shank End Viaduct on the Scottish borders is without doubt the defining structure on the lost Waverley line, and just one of the many remnants still found along this once scenic railway. 2 miles north along the track bed sits Stobbs Castle, an old decaying manor house where many passing folk have found themselves gripped with the utmost feeling of dread and fear. For over 50 years, a military camp was housed here in the fields behind. There, hundreds of German soldiers were imprisoned during and after the war. Such a bleak place was this, that even in the summer, depression was rife amongst its prisoners, and those who chose to abandon hope and life itself were buried in the woodland overlooking the railway. Although the bodies have been relocated, it is their souls that are still said to haunt the area, as those passing through this lonely cutting frequently hear the unearthly moans of the dead soldiers emanating from the woodland above. From the seaside town of Minehead in the southwest of England, a small heritage line pushes inland through the lush, rolling countryside of West Somerset. Amidst the sweeping hills of the Exmoor National Park, and in the shadow of its magnificent castle, lies Dunster Station, on the reawakened West Somerset railway line. But behind the picture-perfect setting, a menacing spectre is seen here, lurking in the goods shed. Legend tells of a shunter who was killed here many years ago, and it is his dark shadow that is seen moving around the dark corners of this old, cavernous building. Of those that do see it, few ever talk about their experience of the Phantom of Dunster Station. For over a decade, Mayfield Station sat forgotten amidst the bustling city of Manchester. Built over a century ago, its rusty ironwork, broken roofs and decaying platforms are the sorry reminder of this once busy, now abandoned terminus. Within the crumbling walls of this dilapidated building, railway workers and interlopers have reported hearing the disembodied sounds of footsteps and what can only be described as unearthly moaning. Whether it be the signalman who hanged himself here or the night workman who fell to his death down the lift shaft, no one knows for sure who the tormented spirit is that roams the platforms of this old, forgotten station. Across the wild fenlands of Cambridgeshire stands a lonely railway crossing. one shrouded in mystery following a terrible accident that happened here many years ago. In the days before automated barriers, the bitter Siberian wind that howls across these plains and the thick fog that often accompanies it made negotiating this remote, quiet and lonely crossing treacherous. For the unfortunate few, unlucky enough to see or hear a locomotive bearing down on them, it may ultimately have been too late. On the 28th of February 1948, 6 German prisoners of war perished here when the lorry transporting them from the nearby Glatten camp was struck by a passing express. When the fog sweeps across the land, some who have braved this crossing with its fearful reputation claim to have seen the ghosts of 6 bedraggled soldiers standing between the barriers, a constant warning to those who pass the crossing of death. Overlooking the village of Charfield, nestled alongside the Birmingham to Gloucester Railway, sits the church of St. James. Within its churchyard lies a grey granite cross, a memorial to the victims of a terrible accident that happened on the railway below. On the morning of October the 13th, 1928, a mail train carrying 60 passengers jumped the signals at Charfield. Striking a freight train on the line ahead, it careered head-on into an oncoming locomotive. 16 people were believed to have died, though intense fire made identification of the dead and an accurate body count impossible. Among the carnage were the remains of 2 young children. Their bodies were never claimed or identified, and are remembered simply as 2 unknown. For the next 30 years until her death, a woman believed to be the children's guardian would make regular visits to the memorial, dressed head to toe in black. Since then, according to local accounts, this mysterious visitor continues her pilgrimage. Her dark, ghostly figure is frequently seen, kneeling before the memorial, where she remains silent and still before disappearing into the sunlight. For over half a century, strange shadows, piercing screams, and unexplained accidents all face staff and night watchmen at the British Museum in London. These were attributed to an ancient artifact on display in the Egyptian Hall. A richly ornamented coffin lid belonging to a priestess of Amun-Ra, god of the sun, and aptly nicknamed the Unlucky Mummy. Discovered in 1884 during an excavation in Thebes, the Unlucky Mummy was purchased as a souvenir by 4 wealthy English tourists who quickly fell foul of the wrath of Amun-Ra. The first left his hotel and walked into the desert, never to be seen again. The second was fatally wounded in a shooting accident, while the third contracted malaria and died a slow and agonizing death. The fourth, Mr. Arthur Wheeler, returned to London with his souvenir, only to be met with great family tragedy and utter financial ruin. On good advice, the priestess was donated to the British Museum, where she remained on display until 1940, when war broke out across Europe, and all the museum's artifacts were relocated to the tunnels of its recently abandoned railway station. Over time, the station and its platform vanished, its tunnels sealed for an eternity. And although the Unlucky Mummy returned to display in the museum, her spirit chose to remain in the subterranean catacombs of that old, forgotten station. Just a short distance along the tracks sits bustling Holborn. There, staff and passengers have complained of freakish lights and demented screams emanating from the tunnels when the last train has left and the station falls silent. Across the bustling London to Brighton line sits Clayton Tunnel, its brooding intensity well suited to its dark history, where a terrible incident happened within these gloomy walls, one which still haunts the area to this day. On the morning of the 25th of August 1861, a passenger train carrying hundreds of seaside revellers collided with an earlier, equally laden service that had stopped within the tunnel walls. Passengers burnt, scalded and suffocated by the burning embers of the broken engine were removed from the wreckage to the fields and hillside above. There lay dead, dying and injured in what quickly emerged as one of the worst rail disasters of its time. To this day, the fields and woodlands surrounding Clayton Tunnel remain a haunted place, with reports of strange, mist-like figures wandering the area, believed to be the lost souls of the 23 people that died that fateful summer's morning. In the Lincolnshire countryside, just 2 miles west of the peaceful village of Claxby, there once stood a signal box which was the setting for an unexplained series of events which, to this day, have puzzled authorities and rail workers alike. Aubrey Clark worked the night shift alone for many years at this remote signal box, until one night a neighbouring signal box tried to contact him, to no avail. A passing locomotive stopped to check on Aubrey, only to discover his lifeless body slumped in his armchair. From that night onwards, staff at Claxby complained of heavy, laboured breathing and loud raps on the door, all echoing around the walls of this small, isolated building. Even after its decommission, signalmen at nearby Market Racing would report bell codes coming from the derelict signal box at Claxby. Deep beneath the tidal waters of the Severn, between England and Wales, runs one of Britain's longest railway tunnels, which, since its completion in the late 19th century, remains one of the busiest and most vital passageways on the network. Construction began in 1873 on what became one of the most challenging engineering feats of its day, as yard by yard, year after year, the navvies dug their way through the silt and sludge beneath the cold, icy river. Conditions were hazardous, and both flooding and collapse, even asphyxiation from the poor ventilation, was an everyday threat for the men. And it is one such incident that still lingers within these tunnel walls today. On the evening of October the 17th, 1883, a perfect storm was brewing along the estuary as around 90 workers descended the marsh pit on the Welsh bank to begin their grueling night shift in the tunnel below. Suddenly, from out of the darkness, a great tidal wave burst over the sea wall, plunging a vast torrent of water into the pit. Immediately, the tunnel began to flood as the water cascaded in. Workers trampled over one another as they scrambled up the tunnel's gradient to escape the impending deluge of water. As the water subsided, one of the men began climbing the long ladderway back to the surface. Unfortunately, halfway up, a second wave struck with such force it dashed him from the ladder, sending him crashing to his death 50 feet below. It is this unfortunate fellow that is said to roam the trackside ever since. his wraith-like figure terrifying many over the years as he emerges from the darkness, releasing a chilling scream which reverberates throughout the old tunnel walls, said to echo his final living moments. Hell hath no more fury than a woman scorned, a paraphrase that is fitting for the chilling encounters had by many on the Thornton Viaduct over the past 100 years. Built in 1878, the bridge once carried passengers across the Pinchbeck Valley near the city of Bradford on what was part of the Great Northern Railway. It is also the home to one of the railway's most menacing spectres. Rebecca, or Fair Becca, as she was affectionately known because of her beauty, once lived in the nearby village of Thornton. She attracted the attention of many a man, to the displeasure of her jealous husband. One day, he discovered his fair Becca had succumbed to the attentions of one of these determined young village men, and with a deep, hidden rage, he lured her to the viaduct, where he threw her off in what he made out to be a terrible accident. With her murderer never brought to justice, the menacing spectre of Fair Becca has roamed this bridge ever since. Passengers on the old railway line were often left terrified on those dark, cold nights as the twisted, chilling face of Rebecca appeared at their carriage window, trying to claw her way in. With the line lost, walkers along this old viaduct have still had the chilling experience of Fair Becca approaching from out of the dark. Liverpool Street Station in the heart of London sees thousands pass through its ticket barriers every day. But besides the living, the dead are also said to frequent these walls, with reports of strange happenings coming from both staff and passengers since its construction in 1874. Built on the site of an old asylum, the Bethlehem Hospital for the Mentally Ill, or Bedlam as it widely became known, treated some of the most extreme cases of insanity the nation had seen. In time, Bedlam became infamous for the brutality and ill treatment of its patients, even charging spectators to watch and mock the actions of those incurable minds. For over 400 years, these walls echo to the sound of maddening screams until 1667, when the hospital moved to Moorgate and the building fell silent. Following its eventual demolition, construction workers moved in to erect the Liverpool Street Station, but immediately workers began to uncover the skeletons of those that had perished within the walls of the old asylum. Since then, as recently as 2012, over 4,000 remains have been disturbed, and, although reburied, it is these tortured souls who are frequently seen throughout the station grounds, lost in their madness for an eternity. Even today, with all the safety measures of the modern railway, an event will happen, premeditated or unforeseen, that will thrust an unfortunate few from this life into the next. And of those, some are said to return, to walk amongst us, possessed of that undefined, mysterious, and god-awful existence attributed to those ghosts of the railway.